Hi, everyone. Welcome to another segment in Chapter 10 on Monopoly. In this segment, we're going to just look at a few types of monopolies. One of them we have referred to previously, a natural monopoly relying on economies of scale. And another type is a public utility monopoly. It's either owned or granted by the government. So let's take a look at what these are all about. First, let's start with a natural monopoly. So a natural monopoly is arising because of economies of scale. So usually the company sets up, it costs an awful lot of money, and they need a huge amount of sales enabled to make some profit in the long run. So a natural monopolist is defined as a single producer able to produce at a lower cost than competing firms could. Again, that usually arises because of economies of scale. Over the long run, the monopolist has been able to get bigger and bigger and bigger and driving down costs as they gain a larger market share out of necessity. To have this large market share at 100, and we can say that the price the market would bear would be 150, say this is ridership on a train, 150 per use, and the average cost is 140, so they can make a little bit of profit providing they have a huge market share and very low average costs. Contrast that with if they only had half the market share, so half the number of riders, it could be the situation where their average costs up here are way above the actual price that they could charge in the market of 225. The average cost would be quite a bit higher. So again, the natural monopoly arises generally out of economies of scale, and they have to get significantly big. The startup costs are high, and only the market can support only one profitable company in this situation. So we'll come back in a few slides and take another look at this expanded in a bit more detail. But for now, let's look at another very popular type of monopoly that you'll come across. And these are called public utilities. And a public utility, well, that's a good or service that's regarded as essential. So it's regarded as essential, and therefore it's usually provided, owned, and run by the government. And the government is determined that if there's competition in this particular industry providing this essential service to a city, for example, that could be costly and wasteful and maybe even dangerous and have huge service interruptions and things like that, because the perfectly competitive type of situation would result in maybe taking shortcuts and things like that, or maybe having outages. And if it's an essential good or service, the government doesn't want that to happen. So things like providing our fresh water supply to our houses, or even providing our electricity, or providing our garbage collection, or even providing the Calgary LRT, the light rail transit services. These are all monopoly type of services that have government involved in them. They get deemed to be so important or so essential that the government either owns them and runs them, or allows one other company to run or own them. For example, right now, Calgary is experimenting with private garbage collection. Right? Garbage collection was a City of Calgary monopoly run, an essential service, but they're experimenting with private garbage collection in certain areas of the city just to see how that works. And if it works well, they'll probably set up a government sanctioned or a government allowed monopoly, private monopoly for garbage collection services. So let's take a look at that one slide again and tie it into the LRT. So tying it directly into a public utility, which is LRT service in Calgary, but now taking a closer look at these economies of scale type of thing and why only one LRT is profitable in Calgary. And it's the same diagram you saw earlier. And we're just going to go to the conclusion and say, if this is market demand for ridership in Calgary on our LRT, and this is the average cost of a large LRT facility, including the trains, the track, and running it, all the administration, then we can see here that if we get out to about 100,000 riders per day, that's not Calgary's count, but 100,000 riders per day, we're at this lowest of their average costs. So we're at their economic capacity. And the demand at the market is such that the price charged of $150 per ride is above the average cost of $140. So there's a small profit that the monopolist is making, and that's great. But some people say, hey, we should open up competition in Calgary and maybe have two light rail transits competing with each other. I mean, obviously, if you know Calgary, the city's not big enough for that. It just wouldn't work here. But say if it did, and each LRT system was allowed half the ridership, so we did one for the north, one for the south, for example, in Calgary, then they'd only have 50,000 riders each. And given that they're similar types of industries, they probably have a similar type of average cost curve. With 50,000 riders, the average cost per rider could be well up here at $2.50 per ride. And the market would only bear a price of $2.25 per ride. So in that case, in order for a monopolist to exist there, or two companies competing, they'd both be making losses. So that's not a good solution at all. The Calgary market isn't big enough to have two LRT systems. So assuming they have similar types of cost structures, which is an assumption we always make, there's only room for one LRT system in Calgary. Now, you can think of other major cities where there's many LRT systems, many bus systems, many many rapid transit systems. And that's because the market is so much bigger. It allows for more than just one transit system. So you can go through this and read through their answers there, but it shows that there would be a total loss per day if we allowed two to ride or two to run in a city the size of Calgary. Both of them would be losing money, and that would cause problems where there'd have to be government involvement and government going in and subsidizing and making sure things continue to run. So instead, they've realized, hey, let's just have one going, and the city of Calgary runs it. So it's basically a public utility, but it's a light rail transit system. Let's look at some other ways that the government can control the monopolist. If the government's going to allow them to exist, maybe they want to control their behavior a little bit to get rid of some of the bad things that they're known for. And we'll look at that in the next section, and we'll see you when we get there.